Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere you probably didn't plan for. A slow, squishy trudge through mud-soaked alleys and moral ambiguity. You're not a knight or a noble. You're not even a merchant selling slightly off goat cheese. No, tonight, you're the town executioner. That guy, the one who has to know how to swing a sword, tie a noose, and keep his head down all at the same time. You're born into the job, which means, in a way, you never had a chance. 1 minute, you're a squirmy medieval baby, swaddled in rough linen and possibly named something unfortunate like Griselbert. The next, you're toddling around your family's backyard, which just so happens to contain a chopping block and a collection of slightly dented axes. And before you ask, no, you don't get to grow up and choose another profession. This is a hereditary job. Your dad did it, and his dad before him. Congratulations! Your family tree is a slightly blood-spattered shrub. And while bakers get to pass on sourdough starters and blacksmiths hand down prized hammers, you inherit a grim reputation, a rusty toolkit, and a career no one wants to talk about at dinner. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're listening in a sleepy little town of your own, pop your location and local time in the comments. It's fun seeing where everyone's drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You come into the world with an invisible mark, not a cool, magical one, just the social stain of being an executioner's child. In some towns, you're forced to live outside the walls, just beyond where the respectable folk stop pretending to wave. It's not even a metaphor. You literally have to trudge a few extra muddy steps to get home. That distance will follow you your entire life. Your toys are peculiar. Where most kids play with wooden animals or a stuffed cloth doll, you've got a small blunt blade your father gave you. It's purely symbolic. Until one day, it isn't. You quickly learn that play looks different in your yard. There's a stump, a lot of chickens, and a weirdly enthusiastic uncle who insists it's never too early to practice. Historians still argue whether executioners' children were formally trained from youth or simply picked things up by, well, observation. Either way, you don't have much say in the matter. You watch your father come home quiet, always quiet. He doesn't talk about his day. He doesn't make jokes. Sometimes he sharpens tools by candlelight. Sometimes he just stares into the fire like he's waiting for something to crawl out of it. You ask once if it's hard work. He says it's the kind of job where you can't afford to feel much after a while. You hear whispers. The town knows who your father is, who you are. Mothers gently steer their children away from you at market. People avert their eyes like you might suddenly lunge. It's not fear exactly. It's unease, like you represent something they don't want to think about. Death, punishment, justice, or maybe just how little control anyone has over their fate. Even the clergy won't look at you right. Officially, you serve the law, but unofficially, you're tainted. Your whole family is in this weird moral limbo, necessary but not quite clean. You're the human version of a chamber pot, essential, but not something people want to shake hands with. As you get older, the future looms like a weathered scaffold. You try to imagine other paths, maybe joining the guilds, maybe apprenticing as a thatcher, or even joining the clergy. But no guild will take you, and the monastery kindly suggests You try your luck in another parish, one that doesn't know your surname. There's a strange moment, maybe around age 12, where you realize this is it, this life, this role. You won't grow into anything else. You're already a symbol of fear, of consequence, of something dark that people want to believe only exists out there, never at home. And so, you start learning the trade, not just the mechanical how-to, but the etiquette. There's a whole grim choreography, how to stand, how to speak, how to deliver a sentence with your eyes half averted so as not to seem too eager. You're trained in restraint more than anything else. They don't want monsters. They want tools that look vaguely human. You hear stories of famous executioners. There's Meister Franz in Nuremberg, who was said to be so precise that his blade could split fruit in the air, and Jean the Parisian, who supposedly wept after every execution, though some say it was just hay fever. Historians debate whether these stories are mythologized to humanize the role or demonize it further. Either way, they don't help you sleep better. You go to bed to the sounds of owls and distant shouting. Your dreams are strange, not always nightmares, just loud. You wake up tired. The sun rises and your family prepares for another day, another sentence to carry out, another life to unceremoniously end. And through it all, the quiet, gnawing truth sets in. You never chose this. But here you are. You're still young, but already the town has made up its mind about you. Your weirdly isolated childhood isn't so much a phase as it is a long-term forecast, cloudy with a high chance of social rejection. You wake up most mornings before dawn, not because you're disciplined, but because even the rooster thinks you're bad luck. You step outside your family's house, more like a lean-to with a porch, and see dew on the grass, smoke curling from distant chimneys, and absolutely no one waving at you. The local kids, bless them, avoid you like the plague, which, to be fair, is a very real and terrifying thing at this time. You're the one no one wants on their stick-sword team, not because you're bad at it. Oh no, your swings are terrifyingly accurate, but because you represent icky, grown-up stuff, like death, justice, and complicated feelings. You're 12 and already the emotional equivalent of a tax audit. Even animals don't seem sold on your vibe. There's a goat, Marjorie, who once ate a piece of your tunic and has avoided eye contact ever since. The village cat refuses to sit on your lap, and cats usually love sitting on things that don't want them to. You're not dangerous. You're just different. Your chores reflect your station. You're not sent to gather flowers or spin wool. You're sent to fetch salt for preserving things or to help clean blades or, on exciting days, scrub the family's grim ledger, which contains your father's neat, slightly ominous handwriting. It's filled with entries like March 4th, 3 fingers removed, theft. March 12th, hanged, bandit. March 18th, decapitation, noble request. You try not to read too deeply into the noble request part. Your mother, if she's around, handles things with quiet efficiency. She doesn't talk much about the work, but she keeps the house tidy and the food warm. Sometimes she mends your father's gloves with such precision it's like she's stitching a shroud. You ask her once if she ever thought of doing anything else. She just shrugs and says, "We all have our burdens." Historians still argue whether executioner families lived in absolute social exile or maintained certain niche connections through necessity. In some towns, you're strictly forbidden to enter the church. In others, you're allowed to pray, just not too close to the holy relics. Either way, when you're a child, religion becomes less about comfort and more about silent bargaining. You're not even sure who to pray to. Is there a saint for weird family professions? Occasionally, your father sends you into town for supplies. The butcher pretends not to see you. The baker sells you bread, but places it on the counter like you're contagious. One day, a woman pulls her child close as you pass. The child looks confused. You feel it too. When the fair comes to town, you watch from a distance. You're technically allowed in, but no one wants the executioner's kid near the puppet shows. One year, a traveling performer, some lanky man with a lute and questionable breath, makes a joke about the local hangman. People laugh. It's not a good laugh. You don't cry, but you do clench your fists until your nails leave little half-moons in your palms. You try to be helpful, polite, invisible. It doesn't really matter. You're still that child. Not quite cursed, but certainly marked. In private, though, you're just a kid. You build things from sticks. You pretend rocks are people and give them dramatic soap opera backstories. You carve little faces into bits of wood, though your father warns you not to get too good at it. People might get ideas. You find solace in quiet hobbies, picking herbs, listening to wind rustle through the trees, trying to name every bird call you hear before dawn. You meet one or two brave souls who talk to you. The blacksmith's daughter once asks what your family actually does. You try to explain gently. She blinks, then says, "Oh, that's weird," and walks away. Still, it's the most normal interaction you've had in months. One day, a wandering friar stops by your home for water. He notices the tools, the ledger, you. He says, "Ah, God bless your house," then immediately leaves. You're not sure if it's a blessing or a subtle escape. There's no use pretending, really. You live in the shadow of something most people pretend doesn't exist. You're part of a system of justice no one wants to look at too closely. A walking reminder that, for all the pageantry of medieval life, the consequences are as real as the mud between everyone's toes. At night, when the house is quiet and the candles have been snuffed, you lie awake and think about what your father does, what you might do someday. You imagine a world where your family runs a bakery instead. Warm rolls, friendly customers, the smell of cinnamon, instead of whatever that weird iron scent is that clings to your father's cloak. You ask yourself, would it be worse to be poor and loved or secure and avoided? You're 12. You're not supposed to be thinking like this. But here you are, under a blanket stuffed with straw, pondering moral philosophy while mice skitter in the rafters. You fall asleep eventually, not peacefully, but it's something. By the time you reach your teens, you've stopped wondering whether this life could change. The family trade of heads and shame, as you've started calling it in your head, wraps around you like a damp wool blanket. Itchy, heavy, and impossible to shake off without causing a scandal. It's less a job than a hereditary curse with a pension plan that includes precisely one perk. You don't starve, but the price. Oh, the price is visibility without community. Everyone knows you. No one wants to. At some point, your father sits you down. No ceremony, no candles, just a hunk of dry bread and the words, "It's time." And you know exactly what that means. No need to ask. He walks you through your legacy, such as it is, a lineage of people entrusted with state-sanctioned violence and permanent outsider status. He explains the rhythms of it all, the grim processions, the whispered instructions from town officials, the delicate balance of not looking too eager or too remorseful. You're not here to feel, he says. You're here to finish. And so, you begin learning. First comes the theory. What crime gets what punishment? Which rope knots are best suited for public hangings, short drop or long? And how to handle noble criminals, always with more ceremony, never more sympathy. You memorize phrases like drawn and quartered and breaking on the wheel, not as horrifying stories, but as practical vocabulary, like learning plumbing, but with slightly more intestines involved. Historians still argue whether executioners in most towns were expected to memorize the law or simply obey orders from above. In your case, it's the latter. You're not a judge. You're the exclamation point at the end of someone else's sentence. And you're not just learning the how, you're learning the when. The rhythm of punishment follows a kind of macabre seasonal cycle. More thefts in spring, more treason trials in winter. You start noticing the subtler patterns too. When tax collectors start disappearing, you know the nobles are restless. When the bishop gets chatty, something scandalous is brewing. Next comes the practice, not with people, yet. You start with logs, piles of them. Your father lines them up on a stump in the yard. You swing, again and again. Precision, not power. Control, not emotion. One clean stroke, he says, tapping your wrist when it tenses. No hacking. Your uncle visits from a few towns over. Uncle Otto. He brings his own axe, which he introduces like it's a family member. This here's Gertrude, he says, stroking the dull metal fondly. Gertrude has a chip on one side. Uncle Otto has a chip on both shoulders. He gives you additional lessons. How to hide nerves, how to keep your hands dry. He demonstrates by beheading a cabbage with unnerving glee. They don't tell you, he whispers afterward, but the body sometimes twitches. Ignore it. That's just nerves. You aren't sure if he means theirs or yours. One day, your father lets you assist with a real execution. You're not the main event, just there to carry tools and observe. It's a petty thief. Nothing grand, but it's still a life. You feel the weight of it in your knees. The crowd is eerily quiet, as if everyone's pretending this isn't actually happening. Your father performs the act with clinical efficiency. No flair, no words. You watch, and something shifts. Not horror exactly, just gravity. Like you've stepped into a deeper layer of reality. One where people don't come back. Afterward, your father doesn't debrief. He just hands you the blade to clean. That's your job now. Your friends, if you could call them that, begin to vanish one by one. Some move away, some just stop talking to you. At first you wonder if it's something you did. Then you realize it's not you. It's the job. It always has been. You overhear things. Parents telling children to stay away, old women whispering in corners. The town crier skips your name when listing contributors to local festivals. You helped raise the maypole. You painted one of the banners. But your presence makes people uncomfortable, and so it's politely erased. Sometimes you fantasize about leaving, running away to another town, starting over as a stable hand or a wandering bard. But then you remember everyone can tell. Your walk, your eyes, the way you grip a mug like it might try to escape. You carry the role in your body now, and that doesn't wash off. At home, things are quieter. Your mother ages in fast forward. Your father talks less and sharpens more. You notice the ledger is filling up faster than it used to. You ask about it. He grunts. The world's getting meaner. One afternoon, while oiling the tools, you ask your father what it's like to end someone's life. He pauses, then says, like putting out a candle, except the room stays dark after. You don't ask again. At night, you stare at the ceiling and think of all the things you'll never get to be. A soldier, a scholar, a hero in a ballad. You'll never walk into a tavern and get a round of applause. You'll never marry into a merchant family. You'll never be normal. What you will be, however, is remembered, if only for a moment. A name scrawled in a dusty ledger, a whisper in someone's frightened story, a shadow on a scaffold. And you'll come to realize that's all this job ever offers. Not glory, not redemption, just a moment of presence in someone else's fear. You're 15 when Uncle Otto decides it's time to really train you, which, in Otto speak, means more unsolicited advice, less structure, and a whole lot of sweaty yelling. He insists you learn every method, not just the clean ones. You've got to know the rope, the sword, the stake, and the wheel, he says, while gnawing on something that might once have been bread. You don't want to get to Market Square and realize you've tied the wrong kind of knot. That's how you end up with a twitching noble and a very angry bishop. You start to understand just how broad and bleak the executioner's toolkit, really is. It's not just axes and ropes. Oh no. There are branding irons, thumbscrews, stretching racks, devices with names like the heretic's fork and the pear of anguish, which, despite sounding like medieval produce, are not things you'd want near your mouth or anywhere else. Otto walks you through each item with the enthusiasm of someone giving a tour of a novelty teapot collection. You try to take notes, but every page ends up with drawings of knots and an alarming amount of grease stains. You learn how to tie a noose so it snaps the neck cleanly. You learn how to dull an axe, yes, dull, if the punishment calls for extra suffering. Sometimes it does. You ask, cautiously, if anyone ever refuses to perform a particularly cruel sentence. Otto snorts. Refuse? You think they ask us for opinions? You get the scroll, you do the work. You don't get clever with kings. Historians still debate how much freedom executioners had in interpreting punishments. Some records suggest a kind of professional discretion. Others point to rigid mandates from the local magistrate or crown. Either way, in your family, questioning a sentence is a fast track to unemployment, or worse, becoming the next sentence yourself. You also learn the soft skills of the job: reading a crowd, calming a condemned person, delivering bad news with something approaching dignity. Your father calls it the performance of civility. You're part official, part priest, part butcher. Some days, the lines blur completely. There's a ritual to prepping for executions. You arrive early. You inspect the wood of the scaffold. You test the rope's tension. You clean your tools until they gleam in the morning light. Not for aesthetics. People don't like to see rust near someone's last moments. It's a weird gesture of respect, but it matters. The morning of your first full execution arrives sooner than you'd like. A thief, maybe 17. No parents came to claim him. You go through the motions: rope, platform, orders from the constable. The boy is shaking. You notice a smear of dirt on his cheek. You want to say something, but your throat is dry. You pull the lever. There's a sound, then silence. The crowd murmurs. You step down. Afterward, you vomit in an alley. Your father pats your back once, like that's enough. It gets easier, he says. You're not sure if that's a comfort or a threat. You try to distract yourself with mundane things, sharpening, chores, even your old stick sculptures. But something's changed. There's a weight now, like you're walking with someone else's shadow stitched to your heels. The townspeople notice, or maybe they don't. Either way, their stares last a second longer. The whispers grow a decibel louder. A few coins appear on your doorstep. Hush money or pity, you're not sure. The local innkeeper starts sending over scraps. A quiet thank you? A bribe? You learn not to ask. One strange day, a noble sends for you. Not your father. You. The man wants a private discussion. You show up, cleaned and clothed in your second-best tunic. He's lounging in a chair that probably cost more than your entire house. He talks circles around the issue before landing on his point. Someone in his estate has been stealing wine. He wants discretion. A mild punishment, he says. Nothing scandalous, but something memorable. He smiles like he's just offered you a piece of fruit. You nod. You leave. You tell your father. He grunts. Mark him then. A hot coin to the arm. And that's what you do. Quietly. No crowd, no witnesses. Just the hiss of metal, the sound of breath held and broken, and the smell, oh, the smell of scorched skin and something deeper, older. Later, you sit outside and stare at your hands. They don't look any different, but they feel changed. Not worse, not better. Just not yours anymore. Your father gifts you your own blade. It's nothing fancy. The edge is nicked, the handle worn. This one's yours now, he says. Keep it sharp. Keep it quiet. You realize it's not just a tool, it's a key to status, to solitude, to survival. Some townspeople begin to acknowledge you now. A nod here, a discount there. They still don't want to touch you, but they need you. It's a cold kind of power, but it's power nonetheless. You carry it carefully. Your toolkit is now your closest companion. While other tradesmen carry belts of chisels or satchels of herbs, you carry a sword nicknamed Martha, 3 types of rope, and a pouch full of ominous-looking pins. Oh, and a sharpening stone that lives under your pillow. Not because you're afraid someone will steal it, no one wants your stuff, but because you like knowing it's there just in case. Tools of the trade, swords, ropes, and regret. It's a phrase you whisper to yourself sometimes like a mantra, or maybe just to fill the silence between jobs. You maintain your gear with obsessive precision, not because you enjoy it, though the repetitive motions are strangely soothing, but because one slip of the blade, one bad knot, one creaking gallows beam, and suddenly your professionalism becomes a town-wide embarrassment. Your father reminds you of that daily. You've got at least 2 axes. The ceremonial one, used for noble executions or when the crowd expects a show, and the practical one, duller but more reliable. There's a rope treated with wax for silent work, a gag cloth, because sometimes people sing or scream, and not everyone appreciates either. There's even a leather apron, which offers no real protection, but somehow makes people feel better about the whole affair. Then there are the truly unsettling items: branding irons, thumb screws, a long wooden paddle oddly named Justice's Tongue. You don't want to know who named it. You just clean it. The rack, yes, the rack, is stored in a shed behind your house. You pray you never have to use it. It's less an instrument and more a slow-motion argument with the human spine. You learn early on to separate yourself from the tools. These are just objects, you tell yourself. Implements, like a broom, but worse. Still, every so often, when the light hits them just wrong, you wonder what your life might have been if you'd inherited a paintbrush instead. Historians still argue whether executioners personalize their tools. Some records show decorated hilts, etched initials, even charms tied to axe handles. Others suggest everything was strictly standardized, like grim state-issued stationery. In your case, it's a bit of both. You tie a bit of cloth around the sword hilt, your mother's old kerchief. For luck? For guilt? You don't say. You're expected to keep things sharp. Axes must split through bone and sinew in one clean motion. Anything less, and people complain. Yes, they complain. Not to you, of course, to the magistrate, to the priest. You'll hear the whispers later. Took 3 swings, made a mess of it. I told you he was too young. Because that's the part no one explains. You're not just executing the condemned, you're performing for the crowd. They expect efficiency, sure, but also dignity, theater, morbid civility. A botched execution doesn't just reflect badly on you, it reflects badly on the town. It lingers in the air like a bad smell. And speaking of smells, let's talk about those. You grow accustomed to them eventually. The thick iron scent of blood, the mustiness of unwashed flesh, the acrid tang of fear sweat, which is surprisingly different from regular sweat. Then there's the sour, burning odor when heat is involved, brands, tar, or the rare but memorable burning of personal effects. You learn to breathe through your mouth and carry a sachet of herbs up your sleeve. Mint, if you're lucky. Moldy lavender, if you're not. There's a moment every morning when you open the chest where your tools live, and for a few seconds, it's like looking into a mirror. Not your reflection, your role, your identity, the things you carry, literally and metaphorically. You start seeing tools everywhere. A rusted blade in a field reminds you of a ceremonial sword. A length of cord at the market makes you instinctively estimate tensile strength. You dream about ropes. That's not metaphor. Actual dreams. You wake up sometimes feeling the rough twist of it in your hands. One night, a stranger visits your cottage. A wandering merchant, maybe. He sees your tools by the fire and asks, "You a craftsman?" You nod, but don't clarify. Let him think you're a carpenter. Let him think your work leaves things standing. You take quiet pride in how well-maintained everything is. Not for show, but because it's the only part of your world you can really control. The rest, the sentences, the social exile, the looks, it all shifts like mud in rain. But your blade stays sharp. Your knots hold. Your ledger remains perfectly alphabetized, though no one ever checks it. Sometimes you lay the tools out at night just to look at them, not in a dramatic way, just to remember who you are. Or maybe to imagine, for a fleeting moment, that you're someone else entirely. A healer, maybe. Someone whose tools bring comfort, not fear. And then the sun rises, and someone knocks at the door, and you fold the cloth back over your tools and step into your boots, already bracing yourself for whatever sentence lies ahead. There's something they don't tell you about this job, not in the ledgers, not in the whispered instructions from your father, and certainly not from that cheerful monk who once told you, "God bless your patience." It's this. The worst part of being an executioner isn't the swinging or the slicing or even the judgmental stares. It's the smells. Specifically, the smells of justice, or as you privately call them, the aromas of mild horror and rotting bureaucracy. You don't get to execute people in perfumed halls or breezy meadows. No. Most of your work takes place in poorly ventilated town squares, overused prison yards, or sticky rooms that smell like old cabbage and damp wool. If you're really lucky, the gallows are built over a bit of a drain, so the mess has somewhere to go. But more often, you're ankle deep in a blend of mud, bodily fluids, and yesterday's regret. There's the scent of sweat, of course, not the healthy kind, the fear kind, sharp, sour, and immediate. The condemned usually starts sweating before you even speak. It hits your nose like vinegar mixed with metal, and once you know it, you'll smell it forever. Then there's the stink of the holding cells, people packed together in stone rooms with no fresh air, no proper latrines, and certainly no soap. You have to go down there sometimes to deliver a name, to fetch a body, to verify that, yes, this is the right person to drag out at dawn. Every time you walk in, your brain tries to politely excuse itself from your skull. And the clothes. Oh, the clothes. You think people facing death would wash? They don't. Some wear their nicest tunics, which haven't been touched since their cousin's wedding and still smell like wine and regret. Others just wear whatever, which in some cases is very little and includes an alarming number of holes. You try not to stare or breathe. Your own garments aren't exactly fragrant either. No matter how much you clean your apron or scrub your boots, there's always a lingering whiff of something that says, "This person works with fluids." You've tried herbs, vinegar, ashes. At one point, you even experimented with boiled orange peels. It helped for 5 minutes. Then it didn't. Historians still debate whether executioners were provided with uniforms or relied entirely on their own wardrobe. Evidence leans toward bring your own apron and hope for the best. A few wealthy cities might have issued a black cloak or special gloves, but you've never worked in those places. You get what you sew yourself or what the tanner reluctantly lets you buy from his back shelf. Burning plays a big role in the sensory landscape of your life. Torches, brands, even the occasional execution by fire, though rare, leave behind a charred scent that clings to your hair, your fingertips, your soul. You once lit a pyre for someone accused of witchcraft. The air turned thick and oily, and the crowd went silent halfway through. You smelled smoke for 3 days, even after bathing. Your father used to carry a pouch of crushed juniper berries. Said it cleared the nose before a particularly nasty job. You tried it once. It helped a bit. Mostly, it just made your mouth taste like a very confused pine tree. There's also the peculiar stink of fear itself, not just sweat, but breath. The breath of someone who knows it's their last. It's hard to describe. Sour, desperate, warm. You come to dread that final exhale more than the blade itself. And then there are the festive days. Execution by festival, they call it. Public hangings held during fairs or coinciding with saints' feast days. The air is thick with roasted meats, spiced wine, and children laughing near puppet booths. And in the middle of it all, you, standing in your apron holding a rope, while someone sells honey cakes 15 feet away. There's a strange contrast to it. the sweetness of candied nuts mingling with the coppery tang of spilled blood. No one talks about it. They pretend it's normal, and in a way it is. You've learned to navigate it all. You breathe shallowly, you chew cloves on bad days, you dab lavender oil under your nose when you can spare it. You burn dried rosemary in your work shed, not for spiritual reasons, just because it smells like something other than rot. But you never quite forget the bouquet of your profession. One summer, a condemned man gifts you a sprig of mint from his pocket. "To remember me by," he says. You're not sure whether to laugh or cry. You keep it, dry it, press it between 2 pages of your ledger. For weeks, your tools carry a faint, ghostly freshness. Then it fades. It always fades. And you go back to the usual cocktail of dirt, death, and despair, with a side note of old onions, if Otto's nearby. Because this job, for all its weight and fear and stigma, is not silent. It smells, it stinks, it lingers in your nose long after the crowds have gone and the scaffold's been scrubbed. And when you sleep, if you sleep, you smell it still. Even in your dreams. You've now got the skill set, the gear, the nose of someone who can identify 4 types of damp just by scent. And yet, despite all this, everyone wants you, nowhere near them. It's not hostility exactly. It's not even fear most days. It's just that odd, slippery discomfort, the kind that makes people subconsciously shift away from you at the bread stall. You're a walking reminder that justice isn't just a word scribbled in a castle scroll. It's a man with calloused hands and a red-stained apron. You go into town only when necessary, which means you buy turnips like you're committing a heist. Hood up, head down, exact coins counted in advance. The market vendors don't cheat you. They just make sure to hand you your items with tongs. One time, a fishmonger made a show of sanitizing the stall after you left. It was, you had to admit, thorough. Some families go so far as to cross the street when they see you. Others do the opposite, walking past with forced cheerfulness, loudly announcing to no one, "What a beautiful day for honest work." It's unclear whether they're complimenting or warning you. But the worst is when people hire you, because they will, and then pretend you don't exist. You're paid in silence, sometimes in bread left on your doorstep, sometimes a pouch of coins wrapped in cloth, always accompanied by the distinct sound of a door shutting quickly behind you. There's no winning. If you're polite, people assume it's creepy. If you're quiet, they assume you're brooding. You once helped a cartwright whose wheel had fallen off. He looked terrified the whole time, thanked you like you'd spared his life instead of just offering a shoulder. You don't blame them, not really. You represent the boundary between order and chaos. And nobody wants to have tea with the boundary. Historians still debate how deep this social ostracism ran. Some accounts suggest executioners lived in designated homes marked by paint or signs. Others describe secretive interactions, with townsfolk communicating only through intermediaries. You suspect both are true. It depends on the town. Yours? A strong contender for the pretend you're invisible method. At church, you're given a designated seat in the back, not a pew, exactly, more of a stool, near the draft. People whisper that your prayers don't count the same. You're not sure if that's theology or just awkwardness turned into folklore. Either way, you still show up, quietly, every week, because no matter what people think of you, you still think of you. And you'd like to believe there's more to you than your tools. Romance. Don't even ask. It's like being a leper, except your hands work fine and no one sends you pity bread. The one time someone flirts with you at a midsummer feast, it turns out she's drunk and thinks you're the town tanner. You don't correct her. For an hour, you pretend you work with leather and not justice. It's the best hour you've had in months. And yet, despite all this, people still need you. When the constable knocks on your door, he never makes eye contact. He delivers the scroll like it's poisoned, but he still comes. And when the scroll says noble, he even says thank you, because deep down, he knows he wouldn't do your job for all the coin in the kingdom. Children are the only ones who behave differently, not the ones you grew up with. No, they're long gone or carefully distant, but the very young ones, they don't know yet. They haven't learned to flinch. Some stare at your boots. Others ask innocent questions like, why is your beard shaped like that? Or, is your job fun? You never answer honestly, but you smile. That's rare enough to get a few more stares. You keep your house clean. Not that anyone visits, but it helps. You grow herbs out back. You repair your own shoes. You try to build something resembling a routine, because in this life, routine is safety. It tells you the world still turns, even if it's not turning for you. Sometimes you're invited to do work in nearby towns. These are strange gigs. You pack your tools, walk half a day, show up unannounced, and someone always meets you with a look that says, "Oh, we hoped for someone taller." You do the job. You get paid. You leave. It's the closest you ever get to a vacation. On those rare nights when nothing needs doing and the stars are particularly clear, you sit on your porch and wonder what it would be like to be anonymous. To walk into a room and have no one recognize you, no one whisper, just a man buying turnips. You laugh at the thought, because anonymity, like acceptance, is something you'll never quite get to hold. Not in this life, not in this job. But still, you hold your head high. You do the work. You carry the blade. You follow the scrolls, because someone has to. There's something quietly insulting about how much paperwork is involved in your job. You'd think it was all about swords and gallows, right? The drama, the spectacle, the swift finality of it all. But no, before any neck meets steel, you're knee-deep in parchment and ink. Bureaucracy, it turns out, is the real executioner, and it kills slowly. Each punishment, each act, each swing of the axe must be documented neatly, accurately, and in that precise language the magistrate insists on, where you're not even allowed to write, "head came off clean." No, you must say something like, "Sentence was carried out in accordance with civic decree, without deviation." Riveting stuff. The official ledger is a monster. Bound in calfskin, it smells like moldy glue and the inside of a candle. You're responsible for maintaining it. Each date, name, crime, sentence, and outcome. You are, in effect, the legal historian of unfortunate endings. And if you so much as smudge a date or misspell a nobleman's name, you'll hear about it. From the magistrate, from the scribe, from the priest, possibly even from the widow, who will drop by only to say, "It's 2 F's in Hefferson, not 1. Noted, madam. You also have a smaller personal log, your father's tradition. It's tucked in a drawer near your bed. Less formal, more reflective. Sometimes you write just a sentence. Other times, whole paragraphs about how a man blinked too fast, or how the crowd was eerily silent, or how the wind kept blowing your hood sideways and made everything feel even more surreal. You're not supposed to have opinions, but there they are, pressed into paper, inked in crooked lines and shorthand symbols only you understand. It's your way of staying human. Then there's the correspondence. Oh yes, letters, requests from other towns, clarifications from clerks. One time, a letter arrived asking if you'd be available to assist with a noble execution 3 towns over. Bring your own rope. You didn't even get a "Dear Sir." You reply with quill in hand and growing disdain. Yes, available. Will require lodging and payment in coin, not cured meat. That last bit wasn't a joke. You were once paid in ham, not even good ham, just damp. And all this writing happens at odd hours. You can't exactly do paperwork at the gallows. So you come home late, hang your tools, wash your hands in icy water, and sit down by candlelight. The ink freezes in winter. In summer, it runs. Your handwriting, once tidy, now leans like it's had a few ales. But worst of all is the public copy of your records, which gets displayed on a board outside the town hall. No names, of course, just dates and crimes. But still, it's there. And people gather, they point, they mutter. You see them reading, see their eyes flicker over your careful penmanship, and for a second you feel exposed in a different way. Not for the blood, but for the neatness, for the part of you that tries to do this job well. You once tried to delegate the paperwork to your younger cousin. He lasted 3 days before declaring, "I'd rather mop the gallows." Fair enough. Historians still argue whether executioners were required to maintain full records or whether this was done by clerks. Some towns preferred to keep the executioner far from ink and scrolls. Others, like yours, simply didn't want the job, and so passed the burden downward. As usual, even with all the ledgers and logs, people still talk. The written word may be dry and precise, but gossip is wild and sticky. You'll hear it in the market. "Did you hear he missed?" Or, "I heard she cursed his name and the sky went dark." None of it makes it into your report. You stick to facts: name, crime, time, outcome. You don't record the screaming. You don't note the look in someone's eyes. That part lives only in your memory and in the quiet spaces between your sentences. Sometimes you wish you could write the truth, the actual truth, that someone cried when their friend's name was read aloud, that the priest said the wrong words and no one corrected him, that the condemned asked for their shoes to be given to their brother. But the scroll doesn't care. The court wants clarity, not sentiment. You keep a box of rejected pages under your bed. Notes you wrote, then crossed out. Entries you started, then realized were too human for the record. On the worst days, you open it and read through, like flipping through a catalog of people you weren't allowed to feel sorry for. One evening, the ink bottle tips and ruins an entire sheet. You stare at the black puddle spreading across the name of a man you just executed. It feels, in that moment, like a mercy, like the page is erasing him more gently than the sword did. You rewrite it neatly, and you go to bed wondering why bureaucracy feels heavier than your axe. Every now and then, rare enough to surprise you, frequent enough to keep the job from being pure doom, you get a little something extra: a crust of bread, a skin of ale, a well-used coat that smells like smoke and optimism. The occasional perk: tiny kindnesses, little bribes dressed up as gratitude. This job, for all its public shame and personal turmoil, comes with an odd bonus structure. It's never official. It never comes with a thank you note. But when you wake up to find a wheel of hard cheese on your doorstep, wrapped in burlap and clearly too expensive for casual snacking, you know someone appreciated your work. It's not always clear who. Sometimes the gift comes from the town council after a high-profile sentence that went particularly smoothly. Other times, it's from the family of the victim, an awkward gesture soaked in sorrow, a bottle of mead, a handful of apples. Once, someone left you a feather mattress. You never figured that one out, but you slept better for a week, and yet no one ever says a word. You walk by the person who left you the ale, and they avoid your eyes. You nod politely. They pretend they didn't see you. It's a weird dance, mutual acknowledgement of a grim transaction neither of you wants to discuss. You learn to accept these perks with quiet grace, not out of arrogance, but practicality. The job doesn't pay well. Not really. You're technically a civil servant, which sounds official, but in practice means you're always the last to get paid when grain prices go up. So yes, the extras matter. A bag of barley can mean the difference between broth and nothing. A second-hand cloak can keep you warm enough to sleep without shivering. You're not above being grateful for a hunk of mutton. The best perks are the unexpected ones, like when the baker starts slipping an extra roll into your bundle, or when a tanner repairs your belt without charging. They never admit it, but they know. Everyone knows. Even if they hate what you represent, they also understand you serve a role that must be filled, and that most people wouldn't dare fill it. Once, a widow left you a pie, a real pie, spiced pear just barely overbaked. No note. Just left on your doorstep in a clay dish with a slightly cracked edge. You hesitated for an hour before eating it, half afraid it was poison, half afraid it was a mistake. It wasn't. It was delicious. You washed the dish and left it on her stoop 2 days later. No one said a word. But that winter, she started nodding at you in the street. Historians sometimes mention these small exchanges in the margins of town records. Executioner given a loaf for clean conduct, or coat offered in thanks from brewer's widow. These tiny entries are usually ignored in grander histories, but to you, they feel monumental, because they're not just about food or warmth, they're about being seen, even just a little. There's also a certain freedom that comes with being feared. No one cuts in front of you in line. No one shortchanges you at the tavern. One time, someone tried. You looked at them, just looked. They handed over the missing coin with shaking hands. It's not power, exactly. It's the illusion of it. A hollow kind of respect that doesn't translate to invitations or friendship, but can get you the freshest loaf of rye if the baker thinks you're in a mood. Still, it's not all free pies and bonus tunics. Sometimes the perk is a request. A merchant asks you to have a word with someone who owes him. A constable nudges you to make a sentence extra clear. You refuse, usually. You remind them your job is to carry out justice, not invent it. But the implication hangs in the air. You could make life harder for someone if you wanted. You don't. But knowing that you could, that's a strange sort of currency. And then there's the coat. One winter, just before snowfall, a noble you executed left behind a very fine fur-lined coat. Normally, possessions go to the family or the church. But this man had neither. The magistrate nodded once, then looked the other way. It was warm, far warmer than anything you owned. It smelled faintly of cloves and old ink. You wore it for 2 winters, always wondering if someone would say something. No one did, though the town priest looked at it once and muttered vanity under his breath. Maybe, or maybe it was survival, same as everything else. These perks never make the job worth it. Let's be clear on that. There's no roast goose in the world that cancels out the look in someone's eyes when they realize you're their last horizon. But still, on cold nights, when the wind howls through the cracks in your door and your hands ache from gripping the axe too long, you hold that mug of gifted cider a little tighter. And you think, maybe this is all the gratitude you'll ever get. And maybe that's enough. One of the strangest parts of the job, and that's saying something in a career where your daily routine includes things like check rope tension and confirm head placement, is the occasional weird request. These aren't in the official scrolls, no. These are the extra bits, the whispered demands, the peculiar superstitions, the last-minute curveballs that make you question whether you've wandered into some very dark improv theater. Take, for example, the man who insisted on being executed while wearing a garland of garlic around his neck. Not for taste reasons, though garlic does have its appeal, but because he was convinced it would keep the devil from taking his body. You complied. You weren't about to argue spiritual logistics with someone about to meet his afterlife, or the woman who asked to be buried with her cat's whiskers in her mouth. "So I'll always land on my feet," she whispered. You nodded solemnly, though you had no idea what to do with that information. You passed it along to the grave diggers, who probably still talk about it to this day. Then there was the tickling incident. A rich merchant, sentenced to death for fraud, requested to be tickled to death. Whether he meant it literally or was trying to delay the inevitable with ridiculousness, you'll never know. It was denied, of course, but for weeks afterward, people joked about it behind the hands. The tickle merchant, they called him. His death, ironically, was quite unfunny. Superstitions cling to executions like mildew to a bathhouse wall. People believe certain things, strange things, about death and justice. That the soul leaves through the mouth. That a blade that strikes clean sends you to heaven faster. That if a condemned person spits at the executioner, it curses him for 7 winters. You've been spat on twice. So far, no curses, unless back pain counts. Historians still debate how seriously medieval societies took these odd rituals. Some accounts suggest last rites and execution rituals were heavily standardized. Others reveal local flavor, ritual dances, whispered prayers, even the occasional chicken sacrifice. Yes, chickens. One prisoner requested a chicken be placed beside him on the scaffold. When asked why, he just said, "For balance." Then there are the ones who sing. Some sing hymns, others bawdy songs. You once had a young man belt out an entire drinking ballad as the crowd clapped along. When you finally carried out the sentence, the last line still hung in the air. The silence afterward was the loudest thing you've ever heard. Children sometimes slip into the crowd against their parents' wishes to see the strange people up close. You hear them whispering, asking if the rope makes a noise or whether the sword sparkles when it cuts. You wonder how long before they, too, learn the weight of what they're watching. One noble insisted on being executed while standing, not kneeling. "I came into this world upright. I'll leave the same way." You adjusted the platform to accommodate him. The rope was shortened. He thanked you before the lever was pulled. You remember them all, not by name necessarily, but by detail. The man who wore bells on his shoes, the woman who plaited her hair for 3 straight hours before her turn, the thief who asked for a joke before the sword fell. You told him one about a nun and a goose. He laughed, bless him. These quirks, these final requests, they don't show up in your official logs. The scrolls don't have a box for peculiar accessory preference or number of superstitions invoked, but you carry them with you in the quiet space between memory and myth. And the truth is, you don't mind these strange requests. In a job that flattens people into crimes and consequences, they're little reminders that every person you execute is a full story, with odd habits, weird hopes, and a unique relationship with garlic. They're also sometimes funny, not in a cruel way, just in that absurd, quiet humor that sneaks in when the stakes are too high and the silence too heavy. Once, a man asked if you could tell his wife that he'd meant to fix the roof. You nodded. Later, you passed the message. She burst out laughing through her tears, said she'd been nagging him about it for years. That's the thing about death. It doesn't cancel the mundane. If anything, it brings it into sharper focus. People cling to the familiar, songs, jokes, habits, chickens, when they see the end coming. You do your best to honor these last-minute requests, within reason. You can't tickle someone to death, but you can allow a prayer, a piece of music, a final sip of wine. You once offered your own cup to a condemned man. He took a long drink, sighed, and said, "Best one I've ever had." It was just water, but it felt important, and in that moment, you understood something your father had once muttered, half asleep by the fire. They all go different, but the silence afterward is always the same. There's a moment every executioner dreads, more than the sentencing, more than the actual act itself. It's the moment when things don't go quite right. Botched jobs, angry crowds. The days when the clean, efficient ending you've practiced and prayed for slips through your hands like soap in a freezing bathhouse. You never forget your first one. It was supposed to be routine. A thief? Mid-30s. Accused of stealing grain twice. The sentence was clear. One stroke. Quick. Done. The platform was solid. The blade freshly sharpened. You even tested it on a cabbage earlier that morning, which split in two like a buttered roll. But people are not cabbages. You swung. The blade hit, not cleanly. The man cried out, not loud, just enough to freeze the marrow in your bones. You had to strike again. The second time, it worked. The third swing, that was for your shame, not his. The crowd gasped. A ripple of disgust passed through them, and just like that, you weren't the silent functionary anymore. You were a man who had failed to kill properly. And you'd think that's where the shame ends, but oh no, that's where the commentary begins. Did you see that? 3 strokes, my cousin counted. I heard the blade slipped. Can you imagine? Disgraceful. It becomes a kind of low-level chant. For weeks, people look at you differently. The baker's wife doesn't give you that extra crust anymore. The smithy nods but doesn't smile. Even your goat, Marjorie, seems judgmental. You start to doubt your hands, your tools, yourself. You check the blade 10, 20 times. You practice on logs again. You wake in the middle of the night, hearing the noise, the wrong noise, a dull thunk where there should have been a clean snap. Historians still argue whether executioners were held accountable for botched jobs. In some towns, yes. fines, public shaming, even punishment. In others, the prevailing sentiment was simply, don't let it happen again. Your father's advice, when it finally comes, is as blunt as ever. If the crowd sees you flinch, they'll never forget it. So don't flinch. Swing better. Helpful. But the crowd is rarely so reasonable. They don't want to be reminded that death is messy. They want poetry, penance, a story they can tell at dinner, not a man gasping through his final seconds while someone in the back row faints into a meat pie. And when things go wrong, someone's always looking for someone to blame. You're the easiest target. One time, a noble insisted on a specific kind of rope. Imported, stronger, fancier, it snapped, right in front of a gathering of lords and dignitaries. The condemned dropped like a sack of grain, moaned on the ground, then looked around like he might make a run for it. You had to chase him down with an ankle still attached to the broken rope. The crowd was furious, not at the noble who provided the rope, of course, at you. Didn't check it. Shoddy work. Executioners getting soft. You bit your tongue until it bled. The gallows platform itself once gave way mid-sentence. You and the condemned tumbled sideways in a tangle of limbs, robes, and splinters. Someone in the audience laughed. That one stung more than the bruises. You begin to understand why some executioners drink before work, or after, or both. You don't, not yet. But you're starting to see the appeal of something that dulls the memories, that blurs the edges of the faces you've seen. Even when things go well, the fear of failure lingers. Your hands sweat. Your breath shortens. You check the knot twice, then a third time. You pace. You breathe deeply, not for calm, but to make sure the smell of failure hasn't come back. And then, sometimes, you have a perfect execution. One swing, a respectful silence, a few murmured prayers, and someone might nod at you as they walk away. But those are rare, because the crowd doesn't remember the clean endings, only the messy ones. Like a song with a skipped note, the rest of the tune is lost to the mistake. You start to notice that your back hurts more on the days you mess up. Not from the work itself, but from how you carry it afterward. Bent shoulders, tight jaw, dreams that end with the sound of dull steel and an unfinished scream. And yet, you go on, because you have to, because someone must, because you've built your entire life around this strange, brutal rhythm, and the only way through is forward. You sharpen the blade again, check the rope, rebuild the platform, pray the scrolls are brief, and hope, silently, desperately, that the next job will be better. It may surprise you to learn that even in a profession as solitary and doom-laden as yours, there is, believe it or not, workplace drama. Executioners gossip. Oh yes, they bicker, boast, and grumble just like fishmongers and tailors and every other slightly underpaid, socially misunderstood professional. You might not meet in cheery guild halls, but you do cross paths, and when you do, it gets complicated. Most of this drama revolves around territory. Executioners are fiercely protective of their towns. If someone from the next village over gets called in to do a sentence you were available for, that's war. You remember the Bruges incident vividly. A slick-looking fellow named Lawrence, oily hair, too much cologne, rosewater, which is somehow worse than blood, was brought in to perform a noble's execution while you were laid up with a twisted ankle. Reasonable, yes, but Did he have to use that ridiculous red hood and sign autographs afterward? He even left behind one of his own knots. A Bruges twist, he called it. You found it showy and, frankly, unstable. You've been muttering about it ever since. Bruges twist, you scoff to your goat, Marjorie, who listens with great patience but little understanding. Historians have noted that executioners often operated within unofficial networks. You might call it a league of lonely professionals, loosely connected by shared tools, similar nightmares, and the occasional borrowed garrote. There were letters. There were messages scratched onto the backs of ledgers. Once, you received a pouch of new nails from a fellow hangman in Ghent. No explanation, just a note. For the loose board, you know the one. You do, in fact. Of course, this community is riddled with tension. Jealousies over techniques, quiet competitions to see who gets cleaner cuts. You once heard that the guy in Antwerp can do a decapitation with his eyes closed. You hope that's an exaggeration. But part of you wants to try it just to see if you could. Then there are the traveling executioners, the wandering types who go from town to town like grim minstrels. Most locals don't trust them. Too theatrical, too eager. One wore a mask with a painted-on smile. Another handed out pamphlets about merciful punishments. You threw yours in the fire. Some of the gossip is petty. Who's drinking too much? Who forgot to sharpen their blade and had to finish the job with a backup axe? One poor fellow dropped his sword during a noble execution, and it landed in a basket of fish. They're still calling him Herring Head, but not all of it is light. You've heard stories of executioners who went too far, who started enjoying it, who added their own flair, flourishes that weren't requested, cruelty that wasn't sanctioned. Those men don't stay around long. Even a town that tolerates public hangings doesn't tolerate an artist in blood. Every so often, there's a meeting, not formal, usually over shared work. When two towns jointly sentence a band of thieves, for example, you meet in a field or a church basement. You nod at each other like old soldiers. No one talks about the job. Not really. But someone always has ale, and someone always brings up Lawrence from Bruges. Sometimes you trade tools. Not the blade, never the blade. That's too personal. But ropes, clamps, or old books on knots. You once gave someone a pouch of pine tar for waterproofing. In return, they handed you a tin of something they swore would keep your hands warm during winter executions. It didn't. There are rivalries, too. Someone once claimed you borrowed a rope and never returned it. You hadn't. Yours was marked with a red stitch. Theirs had no stitch. This became a matter of principle. The argument lasted 3 letters and ended with someone leaving a rope at your door with a note. Just take it. You didn't. And then there's the rare but awkward subject of job poaching. Once, you received a letter from a neighboring village asking if you'd consider lending your services on a more regular basis. You hesitated, thought about the extra coin, the change of pace, then remembered how your own townsfolk treat you, and realized that was better than being a permanent stranger in a new place. So you declined, politely. But you think about it sometimes. Even with all the rivalries and pettiness, there's a strange comfort in knowing others are out there. Others who also sleep with sharpening stones near their pillows. Others who know the smell of fresh rope and old regret. Others who understand what it's like to have every conversation end the moment you walk into a room. And yes, others who still curse Lawrence from Bruges under their breath. You don't write often, but when you do, You sign the letter with a small mark shaped like a blade over a crescent moon. It's an old symbol. Some say it dates back to Roman executioners. Others say you made it up. Either way, when you get a reply with that mark scratched in the corner, you feel not less alone, but maybe just a little seen. In the end, even executioners need someone to talk about knots with. Your kit is packed, blade oiled, rope coiled, cloak folded. You've done it 100 times by now, but it still feels like preparing for a very grim picnic. No sandwiches, no wine, just tools and tension. You're on the road again, traveling with your kit, and precisely 0 friends is one of the lesser joys of the job. It's not glamorous. You don't stride down highways like a knight or roll into towns to cheers like a bard. You shuffle, you lug, you try to keep your hood low and your boots dry, which is basically impossible because everywhere is mud, always. The roads are rough and uneven. The cart you borrowed has one wobbly wheel and a tendency to attract aggressive geese. You pull it yourself most of the time because no one wants to walk next to a cart full of execution tools. And if they do, you probably shouldn't trust them. You pass travelers, farmers, monks, peddlers, and they give you that look. The one that says, "You smell like iron and guilt." They step aside. Sometimes they cross themselves. Once, a child asked if you were the Grim Reaper. You just smiled. What else is there to say? You travel because smaller towns don't have their own executioner. They borrow, rent, really. You're a terrible party guest. You come for one person, do your job, and leave with the wind. No dinner invitations, no farewell hugs. Your lodgings are variable. Occasionally, someone offers a cot in a barn. Usually, it's a drafty cell near the guardhouse. One time, you slept in a pigsty. The pig was offended. You didn't blame her. And always, always, you have to carry your own tools. No assistance, no entourage. Just you, your sack of ropes and clamps, and your trusty axe wrapped in cloth so as not to alarm the villagers. Not that it helps. You still radiate deeply uncomfortable presence. The guards who receive you are polite but distant. They avoid eye contact, hand you the scroll, and disappear like smoke. No one wants to linger. One constable once said, "I admire your commitment." You stared at him for so long he fled. Historians note that traveling executioners were both feared and needed. Ghostly figures who showed up in the margins of town records and then vanished. You like that image, though it romanticizes the part where you get blisters from dragging your cart up a steep hill during a rainstorm. Weather, of course, does not care what you're carrying. Rain soaks your kit. Wind tangles your ropes. Snow turns gallows platforms into slippery hazards. You've swung a sword in sleet. You've read a sentence while soaked to the bone. You've tried to light a torch with shaking, frozen hands. One winter, your cart tipped over on a narrow pass. You scrambled to collect your tools while a passing shepherd looked on, deeply concerned about the spiked iron clamp that rolled into his path. You offered no explanation. He didn't ask. You try to be discreet. You wrap your gear in burlap. You speak softly. You don't say why you're visiting unless someone forces the issue. It rarely matters. People know. They feel it. Once, you arrived a day early and spent the evening in a tavern corner hoping to pass as a tired pilgrim. The innkeeper served you soup and bread. The regulars ignored you. For a moment, you felt almost normal. Then a boy spotted your axe handle, poking out from beneath your cloak. He shouted, "Executioner!" and spilled his cider. The room went quiet. You left soon after, soup unfinished. You try not to take it personally, but it gets lonely, deeply, absurdly lonely. You talk to yourself more on the road, to Marjorie when she travels with you, to trees, to your blade. "How are we feeling today?" you whisper as you unpack it. Ready to behave? It's not madness, just survival. Better a voice, even your own, than silence so deep it feels like falling. The jobs vary. Some towns are orderly, scrolls crisp, scaffold swept, crowd respectful. Others are chaos, confused instructions, bad rope, drunken guards, someone shouting that it's all a mistake. You adjust, you adapt. You become the constant in their chaos, the one who knows what to do. You keep your head down. You do the work. You pack up. You leave. Once a young woman ran after you, breathless. She pressed something into your palm, a small wooden carving of a flower. "For your kindness," she whispered. You don't know what she meant. You keep it in your pocket anyway. And sometimes, on those long, lonely treks back home, with the wind biting your ears and your boots squelching in ancient mud, you pull it out, just for a moment, just to remind yourself you're not a monster, just a man with a job. Every so often, just when your routines start to feel stable in their bleak, muddy rhythm, you get that kind of scroll, the kind that isn't handed to you in the square or at the guardhouse or even by the usual clerk. No, this scroll is delivered in secret under cover of darkness or by a messenger who refuses to make eye contact and disappears the moment you nod. These jobs come from the top, not the mayor, not the magistrate, royals. You open the scroll and immediately feel your stomach do a slow, sour somersault. It's vague, of course. They never say what they mean, just phrases like, "for reasons of state," or "matters of discretion." And then the closing line, "no record shall be kept." Oh, good. You don't ask questions. You've been trained not to. You gather your things, the travel cloak, the quieter blade, the clean gloves. You don't bring the usual rope, not because you don't expect to need it, but because someone else might. The first time you got one of these jobs, you didn't sleep the night before. You sat with your hands folded, staring at your tools, trying to imagine what discreet work could mean when your entire profession already takes place in a very public corner of society. Turns out it means a body that needs to disappear, or a sentence passed in secret, a noble's cousin who got a little too rebellious, a courtier who said the wrong thing to the wrong person in the wrong corridor. Bandits, the official record says, always bandits, or illness. You're not even a footnote. You arrive at a forest glade, or a sealed-off chapel, or once, memorably, a dried-up well outside a hunting lodge. You're met by guards who look at you like they wish you were the condemned. They grunt directions, point to the place, then walk away. The silence hangs heavy, like a rug soaked in cold tea and secrets. The condemned are different, too. They don't scream. They don't plead. They already know the game is over. Some look at you with dull resignation. Others try to smile like they're hoping you'll go easy. You usually do, not because you like them, not because you believe in mercy, but because you don't want to spend the next decade haunted by the sound of someone sobbing into a royal crest. Historians still argue about how much unofficial justice existed in medieval courts. There's documentation, yes, but also long gaps in noble family trees, sudden disappearances, Hasty funerals, no names, just patterns. You become part of that pattern. Quiet, invisible, efficient. One time, you were handed a purse of coins by a noblewoman who refused to speak. She just nodded. Her eyes were rimmed red. You didn't ask who he was to her. You didn't want to know. You took the purse, left the body in a specified cart, and walked into the forest for an hour before returning to the road. You remember the way the moss felt beneath your boots, how soft the air smelled, how quiet it was, save for the sound of your own breathing. You do not record these jobs in your ledger. That's the rule. But your hands remember, your knees remember, your back remembers. Sometimes they come to you. The knock at the door after midnight, a small escort of mounted guards, a polite voice that says, "We would appreciate your discretion." You don't pack much. You know better than to bring anything you'll want to keep. These jobs don't follow the usual rules. And when you return, if you return, you burn the clothes you wore, you sharpen your blade, you scrub your hands until they're pink and raw, and then you sit and breathe. Because you don't get to process it. You don't get to ask. You don't get to understand. You just get to carry it. You once joked, only to yourself, that discreet work was the royalty's version of sweeping dirt under a very expensive rug. But rugs don't bleed. Rugs don't look you in the eyes. Rugs don't whisper, "Tell my sister it wasn't my fault." And yet, no one ever mentions it again. Not the guards, not the clerk, not even your father, who surely did these jobs too, but never once brought them up. He just looked at you after your first one and said, "Keep your boots clean." Thanks, Dad. You suspect there are others like you. Men who walk alone on foggy nights, who know the layout of castle cellars, who can wrap a body in linen with the precision of a monastery cook trussing a chicken. You don't want to meet them, because if you meet them, it means the work keeps happening. The silence keeps spreading, and more names get erased before they're ever written down. So you keep your mouth shut. You nod when called. You swing quickly. You go home. And you tell yourself it was probably a deer. Totally a deer. Let's talk about your love life. Or, more accurately, the bizarre, lonely, mud-splattered absence of one. Being an executioner doesn't exactly scream eligible bachelor. You might think having your own cottage and a steady profession, one that pays in both coin and unsolicited wheels of cheese, would give you a leg up. But alas, your romantic prospects remain firmly theoretical. The problem isn't you, it's your job. Well, okay, it is a little bit you in that you carry around tools of state-sanctioned death and smell faintly of rope and regret. But mostly, it's the stigma. The social weight of your profession is like an invisible foghorn that follows you into every room shouting, "Not a good husband material," to everyone present. At dances, you don't get asked. At weddings, you're invited for security, not celebration. You stand in the back with your hood up while everyone else links arms and sings about love and wine. You've memorized the lyrics by now. You never sing along. You once tried to court the baker's daughter. She was kind, laughed at your dry jokes, and once said she liked your boots. Things went well for a week. Then her uncle found out what you did for a living and promptly suggested she reconsider, citing vague things like bad luck, moral stain, and poor table manners, the last of which was absolutely unfair. You use a fork like a gentleman. She stopped waving at you after that. So did the rest of the bakery. Historians have little to say about executioners' love lives because, unsurprisingly, they didn't write about them. Most records focus on punishments and scrolls, not pillow talk. But we do know that in many towns, executioners were discouraged or outright forbidden from marrying locals. Some laws even forced them to find spouses in other towns. One charming regulation declared that executioners could only marry women of equivalent dishonor. You're still not sure what that means, but it sounds deeply unromantic, and yet humans are humans. You get lonely. You still feel the ache when you hear someone else giggle in the market or see a couple sharing a crust of bread. You dream of someone leaning against your shoulder who isn't tied up or begging. One spring, a traveling seamstress stayed near your cottage. She mended your sleeve without asking, said your stitching looked like it had lost an argument with itself. You talked for hours that night. She asked about your work. You answered honestly. She didn't flinch. She left 2 days later without saying goodbye. You try not to take it personally. Sometimes someone sends you a favor, small token gifts from anonymous admirers. A red ribbon, a sprig of lavender, a note that says nothing but thank you. You don't know if they're romantic, respectful, or just confused. You tuck them into a drawer anyway. You imagine what it would be like to have a partner, someone who doesn't mind the odd hours or the silences or the way your hand shakes sometimes when you peel an apple. Someone who'll sit beside you while you write your ledger, who'll look at you and see the person, not the profession. But you also know the risks. Anyone too close becomes a target of whispers. The mayor's wife once made a snide remark about the hangman's harlot, referring to a washerwoman who smiled at you twice. The poor woman changed parishes the following month. Even affection in your world can be dangerous. So you focus on the things you can do. You keep your home clean. You brew strong tea. You read quietly in the evening. You talk to Marjorie the goat like she's your oldest confidant. She's a terrible listener, but very good at nodding thoughtfully. You also daydream, not about grand romance, about the little things. Holding hands without people staring, sharing a pear, building a fire together without it being a metaphor for shared trauma. Once you watched a couple dance at a festival, spinning clumsily, laughing, clearly in love. You stood near the well, hood pulled low, your tools locked away for the day. The woman saw you, smiled. The man did too. They kept dancing. You smiled back. You never learned their names, but you remember the song. You've carried out 100 sentences, maybe more. The scrolls blur together. The faces stay with you. And lately, as the nights get longer and your knees creak louder than your front door, you find your mind drifting into strange territory, somewhere between regret and daydream. You start wondering what it would be like to be anything else. A carpenter, maybe, working with wood instead of bone, cutting boards, not necks. You think of smooth, planed tables and the smell of sawdust instead of the sharp tang of iron and dread. You haven't voiced this thought aloud, not even to Marjorie, who, to be fair, never judges. But the idea returns every night, curling around the edge of your mind like smoke. What if you'd picked up a chisel instead of an axe? What if your hands, so used to tying knots and wielding blades, had been trained to fit joints and carve flourishes into beams? You don't hate your job. Not exactly. It's a part of you now, like a scar that's faded but never disappeared. But the question remains, what else could you have been? The older you get, the more the job weighs on your soul. Not just the work, but the knowledge that the work defines you. You're not a man. You're a symbol, a warning, an answer to a question no one wanted to ask in the first place. You go to church more. You sit in the back, the same stool as always. But now you find yourself whispering prayers you never used to care about. You don't ask for forgiveness. You don't believe you need it. But you do ask for clarity, for peace, for fewer dreams. The priest never looks at you. He blesses the whole room in sweeping gestures, but his hand never quite points your way. You try not to take it personally. He probably thinks you're beyond help. Some days you do too. Historians believe that many executioners turned to religion in their later years. Not out of fear, but exhaustion. You're starting to see why. The rituals help. The rhythm, the silence. The idea that there's something bigger than you, even if it isn't particularly interested in you. You've started reading more when you can. Old texts, not just the legal stuff. Stories, philosophy, the ramblings of monks who write about trees and stars and the sound of rivers. You underline passages that make you feel something. Sometimes you copy them down and stick them to your wall. Your favorite one reads, "Even the sharpest blade cannot sever the soul." You're not sure if that's true, but it's comforting. Some nights you sit at your table, your tools locked away, your ledger closed, and you just breathe. You light a candle, pour tea, watch the flame dance. You used to be restless during these moments. Now you crave them. You wonder if it's too late to change, to step away, to do something else. But what would that look like? You're known, marked. You'd show up at the next town, and within a week, someone would whisper, "That's the man who..." And then it's over again. Still, you ask around, quietly, about monasteries, about taking vows, about vanishing. Most laugh it off or steer the conversation away. One old friar, however, just looked at you and said, "You'd have to carry less, but confess more." Fair trade, maybe. You've also started noticing the small kindnesses more. The child who waves before realizing who you are. The vendor who gives you an extra apple, even if he won't meet your eyes. The widow who still places flowers at your doorstep every first frost. None of them cancel out the job, but they remind you that you're not invisible, not entirely. Your father, in his last years, barely spoke. He just sat by the fire, polishing a blade that hadn't been used in ages. You'd ask him what he was thinking, and he'd grunt. Once, though, he said, "I wonder what it's like to build instead of break." You think about that often now. You run your fingers over the smooth grain of your table. You consider picking up a chisel just to try. You tell yourself it's not a betrayal of your past, just a small rebellion against your future. You dream of a life where your hands are known for shaping things, a beam, a chair, a cradle, maybe. But then the scroll arrives and the moment passes. You do the job, quietly, carefully, and you return home to the same stool, the same tools, the same unspoken questions. But the candle burns just a little longer these days, and so do your dreams. Retirement isn't exactly something you plan for in this line of work. There's no gold watch, no farewell banquet, no heartfelt speech from the mayor as he shakes your hand and thanks you for a lifetime of silent trauma. No, your retirement arrives like everything else in this profession. Quietly, awkwardly, and with a mild odor of damp cloth. The scrolls stop coming one season. That's it. No explanation, no apprentice to replace you, just nothing. You wait a week. 2. You sharpen your tools out of habit. Still nothing. Eventually, the magistrate's clerk stops by, chewing on a reed and looking uncomfortable. "We've reassigned sentencing," he mumbles. "A traveling hangman'll pass through once a month. Nothing personal." Ah, yes, the monthly rotation, the modern touch. You nod. Close the door behind him. Stand in your cottage, looking at your now pointless wall of ropes, blades, and perfectly coiled cords. You feel like a retired juggler staring at a pile of bowling pins. So what now? You're not wealthy. The coin saved up over the years is enough to keep you warm and fed, but not much more. You have no guild pension, no property, no family crest. All you got is a reputation that clears out a tavern faster than a case of plague. You move out of town, not far, just to the edge, a little cottage by the river surrounded by trees and fog and space. It's where your father went when he retired. You found the bones of his old workbench still standing under the moss. You rebuild it, and just like that, you begin your second life. You fish, poorly. You patch up a fence that doesn't quite need fixing. You talk to your goat. Still Marjorie, somehow still alive, possibly immortal. You carve, a spoon here, a stool there, quiet things, useful things. People in town still avoid you, even though you haven't held an axe in years. Once an executioner, always an executioner, apparently. Even when your most violent act of the week is pruning your blackberry bushes. There are rumors, of course. He still keeps a severed head in the pantry. He talks to the dead. He sleeps on a noose. People will believe anything, provided it's dramatic and makes them feel better about not inviting you to harvest festivals. One child wanders to your doorstep once, big eyes, missing shoe. You give her bread and send her back home with a carved toy rabbit. The next day, her mother leaves a basket of apples on your stoop. No note. You count that as progress. There's a small community of people out here. The beekeeper, the blind midwife, an old sailor who claims he once married a sea ghost. They don't ask questions. You nod to each other across fields. Sometimes you trade things. Sometimes you just sit. It's not friendship, exactly. But it's something adjacent. You start a new ledger, not for justice, but for tasks. Fix gate latch, re-thatch corner of roof, build bookshelf. It's surprisingly fulfilling. You get to tick things off. Sometimes you make up tasks just to check them off. Drink tea while watching geese. Check. You dream less, or at least the dreams don't wake you up as often. The faces are fuzzier now. The sounds more distant. You wake to birdsong, not imagined screams. That feels like a gift. Still, some days way heavier than others. You visit your old cottage once, just to look. The new tenant is a tanner. No gallows, no ledgers. The herb garden's gone wild. Your old bench is gone, you don't knock. You turn and walk home, boots crunching on dry leaves, hands empty, but somehow still full. There's no legacy, really. No statue in the square, no song, no whispered stories of justice done with a gentle hand. You don't expect any. You did the job. You survived it. That's enough. One afternoon, you sit by the river and carve a small plaque. You don't sign it. You don't even plan to hang it anywhere. But you make it anyway. It says, "I was here. I tried to do it well. And now, the end." not of life. Yours continues, gently creaking along like a cart with a squeaky wheel and too many stories, but the end of being the executioner. That title, that role, that invisible cloak of fear you wore like a second skin for decades. Your legacy is small, quiet, incomplete, but then again, that's how you lived it. There's no grave marked, "Here lies a man of justice." Your family has no coat of arms. Your tools, once sharpened daily, now rust in a chest beneath the bed. You haven't touched them in years, not since the last frost faded from the window and you realized the scrolls would never come again. Some days, you wonder if anyone remembers your name. You pass townsfolk on the road. They nod sometimes. Kids don't know who you are anymore, not really. Just an old man with a limp and a beard like a collapsed haystack. The newer generations have fresh scandals to whisper about. Mayors with gambling habits, a monk caught with stolen cheese, a pig who allegedly sings during thunderstorms. All more interesting than a former executioner who now sells firewood and occasionally carves spoons. And that's fine. You've come to treasure your obscurity, to savor the absence of judgment in the stranger's eyes, to hear your name spoken without that pause. You're not that man anymore. You're just a man. You tend your garden. You feed Marjorie, who has somehow outlived every goat in recorded history. You fix things that no longer need fixing. A loose shutter, a wobbly stool. Yourself, most of all. You walk the same paths you once trudged with a cart full of blades. Now it's a basket of apples, a bundle of herbs, a letter you deliver to a neighbor just because. One evening, you sit beneath the old tree near your house, the one that never quite dies, even in the harshest winter, and watch the wind play through its branches. There's peace in the smallness of things, in not being known, in being allowed to fade without fuss. Historians won't write your story. There's no drama in a man who did what he was told, who tried to do it kindly when he could, and who retired to a quiet corner of the world without complaint. You won't be mentioned in footnotes. No bard will strum a lute for you. But you leave behind clean ledgers, empty gallows. A community that has slowly, without realizing it, stopped fearing your name. That matters more than you thought it would. One day, years from now, a traveler might ask, "Who lived in that cottage by the river?" And someone might say, "An old man, quiet, kept to himself, used to be something, I think, and that'll be enough, because the work ends. But you go on." So now, as the candle burns low and the weight of centuries hangs gently over your shoulders like an old wool cloak, take one last breath with this strange, invisible figure, the medieval executioner. Not a monster, not a myth, just a man, doing a job that no one else would touch, for reasons no one really wanted to explore too deeply. Let the sounds of that life, soft footsteps on muddy paths, the rustle of scrolls, the clink of iron tools being packed away, fade into something slower, softer. You no longer need to carry his burden or remember his name. Just let the quiet settle. In the distance, the wind nudges the trees. A river murmurs somewhere beyond the edge of the field. And inside a small cottage, someone stokes the last coals in the hearth and pours tea into a chipped mug. You're not in the square anymore. No gallows, no crowds, just silence and stars and the sound of your own heartbeat, steady and slow. Let your shoulders drop, your breath deepen. The story is over now. The job has ended. The curtain has fallen, and nothing is expected of you anymore, not even remembering. You did what you could. You survived. You grew old. That's more than most can say. Now rest, drift, let go. You are safe. You are done. Sweet dreams.